Welcome back to Aperture Assassin. I'm your host, Liam Douglas, and in this video, I'm going to be going over the Canon EOS R autofocus menu tabs. So let's get started. So we're in the autofocus menu on the Canon EOS R. Now, like I said in the previous video, most Canon cameras, the menu system is going to be pretty much the same. There'll be certain items that are specific to a particular camera, but the menus and the menu tab layouts will be pretty much the same, and they're color coded the same on all of Canon's cameras. So the first item we have here is AF operation. You can see mine set to one-shot autofocus, and I can switch between that and servo mode depending on what my needs are. AF method, that's where you can select your AF points. You can have face plus tracking, single point AF, which is what I use most of the time. You can have expanded AF area and around, zone AF, large zone AF vertical, and large zone AF horizontal. And it's just going to depend on what your needs are. You can select any one of these. You'll see that when you select some of the other options will change. So if I go to, let's say, the face and tracking, now you'll see I have the ability to activate the eye detect autofocus. Now your camera may or may not have it. If you have an EOS R, you're going to have eye detect autofocus. If you don't, you may not. Like I said, some things do depend on the particular model of Canon camera that you have. But like I said, I use single AF most of the time. The next item, you can adjust the AF frame size between normal and small. And that just is all it has to do with is how big the box is on the screen. So you can see there, that's one of them. Okay, now if I go back into the menu, that's the small one. If I go back to normal, that's the size of the normal one. So that's all that has to do with there, is just changing the size of the autofocus box. Continuous AF, you can enable or disable. That just means whether or not the camera is going to continuously try to get autofocus lock. And then on this particular camera, you have the touch and drag AF settings, which allow you to use the rear LCD to select your autofocus points. You can also drag the autofocus by dragging your finger or thumb across the screen. I do frequently have that enabled on my cameras, but you can turn it off. Positioning method is relative or absolute. And active touch area, you can set it for the right side, left side, top, bottom, top right, whole panel. It just depends on your needs. The second tab for AF is going to be your manual focus peak settings. This isn't going to be available now that I got HDMI attached, but if it was, then you could turn on what's called focus peaking. And basically, if you have a lens that's manual focus only, or if you have an autofocus lens in manual focus mode, you have the AF switch turned off, you could turn on manual focus peaking. And if you do, that allows you to set the camera up so that when you obtain focus, when you're adjusting your focus ring, when you get good focus, it'll highlight everything in the scene with a color, either red or blue. You can change that. I think you can also select yellow. I usually leave mine set for red just because it's easier to spot. The focus guides, you can have that on if you're using an autofocus lens in manual mode. Then you can make it so triangles show up at the top of your viewfinder, and when you get them brought together and lined up in the center of your viewfinder, then you have a focus lock. So that is what that is for. The next tab is your tracking sensitivity for your autofocus. You can set it for locked on or responsive. You can go either or. You see mine set in the middle, which is default. You can accelerate and decelerate the tracking as far as how fast. Again, I don't mess with that. You can set the AF point auto switching. I have that set to 0, which is default. You can set it to +1 or +2. Like I said, I don't mess with that. I leave these settings alone. I just wanted to show them to you as part of this video. The fourth autofocus tab has your lens electronic manual focus. Disable after one shot. You can turn that on or off. You can have AF assist beam firing or one shot AF release priority. One shot enabled. Lens electronic manual focus on, AF assist beam firing on, one shot AF release priority. It just allows you to change the settings for this. You have the one shot enable with magnify and disable in AF mode. All right, so then you have the AF assist beam firing. You can have that turned on or off. That just allows your camera to fire an assisted beam for autofocus lock, especially if you're in a low light situation. So it might come in handy for that. And see, I have mine turned off now. You can turn it off or on. You can have LED assist beam only. There you go. And you see how those settings work. And then you have the one-shot AF release priority, which you can set to focus and release. Again, I leave mine set to the default options. I don't mess with a whole lot of the autofocus settings other than whether or not I use continuous, whether or not I use eye detect, and what autofocus or how many autofocus points or areas I use. The last tab is your lens driven when AF impossible. You can set that to on for continuous search. You can stop focus search by setting it to off. I leave mine on by default. Limit AF methods. You can limit the number of AF methods that are allowed just by checking and unchecking them, as you can see here. So you could remove them from the AF selection menu if you want. I leave all of them enabled by default, so that way I don't have to worry about it. The orientation linked AF point, same for both vertical and horizontal. That's how I leave mine set. You can set it to separate AF points if you want, but I leave mine set on the default. And the initial servo AF point for face with tracking is set for auto. You can change those settings as well. Initial AF point. There you go. You can see that. I have it set that way. Or you can set an AF point with expanded or automatic. So I leave mine set to automatic, which is what it was set to by default. So that is it for the autofocus menu. Not a super long video, just wanted to help go over some of these items in case you're new to photography and you're new to your Canon camera and you wanted a better idea of what these options are for within the autofocus. All right, that is going to wrap up this second video in this series on the autofocus menu in the Canon EOS R or Canon cameras in general. In the next video, we'll be going over the blue tab, which has control over your images themselves, various settings for your images. So we'll be covering that in the next video. This one, of course, is the second in the playlist. When we're done, we'll have 6 altogether once we go through all of the menu tabs in the Canon cameras. I wanted to remind you to please like and subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell icon to be notified when new episodes are posted. And I will see you next time.